Hi, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when and where you're seeing this. Today, I will be going over the basics of Gongfu tea brewing, or as it translates from Standard Chinese, skillful brewing. This is a method that allows you to extract multiple infusions from the same tea leaves by using a small brewing vessel with a high tea to water ratio and short steeping times. I wanted to make a video about this topic because it's something that interests me, and I also thought that perhaps my perspective on how I go about brewing tea can help people out. There are many other videos as well that talk about this topic, so perhaps my video will be a different opinion, though not that much different. Just my personal thoughts, my thoughts about how I go about making tea. But before I get into the practical steps, I want to give you some historical context because understanding where this method comes from will help explain why we brew this way. So, first of all, Gongfu cha literally means making tea with skill, and it has a more recent history than most people realize. The earliest written mentions date to the late 18th century. In 1792, Yuan Mei described tea drinkers in the Wuyi Mountains using tiny pots, quote, that held no more than 1 ounce of water and cups, quote, no bigger than a walnut. A bureaucrat named Yu Jiao wrote about similar practices in 1801. These descriptions come from the Chaozhou region, which borders Fujian and Guangdong provinces. For most of its history, Gongfu cha was a local custom, virtually unknown outside of southern China. Even as late as 1937, it was described as, quote, an art generally unknown in North China, practiced only by connoisseurs. The traditional Chaozhou method involved filling small yixing or Chaozhou clay teapots completely with leaves, typically Fengguan Dansong from the nearby Phoenix Mountain region, and then brewing multiple short infusions. It's worth noting that brewing with whole leaf tea itself only became common during the Ming Dynasty, which lasted from 1368 to 1644. Before that, and for many centuries, tea was ground to a powder and whisked, similar to Japanese matcha, or boiled with spices and salt. The tea culture we recognize today is thus relatively modern. What we now think of as Gongfu brewing, the formalized Chinese tea ceremony, actually developed in 1970s Taiwan. During this period, Taiwanese tea culture blended traditional Chaozhou methods with influences from Japanese tea ceremony, a legacy of the colonial period from 1895 to 1945. This is when practices were formalized and the gaiwan, which was originally a drinking vessel that underwent many changes since its emergence in the Ming Dynasty, became widely adopted as a brewing vessel. So, with that historical information out of the way, let's go into the equipment overview. Let's talk about what you need in order to brew Gongfu style. So, the first thing is the brewing vessel, and you have quite a few options. Now, the most common vessel used to brew tea Gongfu style is the gaiwan, which is that lidded bowl that I mentioned, and the one that I have right here. Gaiwans range from 200 milliliters to very small gaiwans of 60, 50, 40 milliliters. Very small gaiwans. But generally speaking, gaiwans typically range from about 100 to 150 milliliters in capacity and are very versatile tools. They work well for any type of tea. And as you can see, here we have the bowl component, we have the lid, and there's the saucer, which I didn't bring, but it's something that most gaiwans, if you buy one, will bring as well. Though there are cases where you may purchase the bowl and the lid, and no saucer will be used because the saucer itself is, of course, a remnant of the times when the gaiwan was still a vessel to drink tea from. But because it's now a vessel used to brew tea, it's optional, right? It's not as necessary, though some people have managed to take this missing part, this saucer, and adapt it into their brewing style. Some people, for example, don't like using certain grips when they pour tea out because the guy one gets very hot. So you may then use the saucer to grab the bottom part of the guy one and then pour the liquid out, right? So alternatively, you can also use a small Yixing clay teapot or a Chaozhou clay teapot, usually in similar size ranges. Clay teapots are porous and will absorb flavors over time, so many people dedicate specific teapots to specific types of tea. You'll have perhaps one for oolongs and one for pu'er, and so on. So, next, the tea pitcher. This is where you pour your tea from the brewing vessel before serving, and I'll show you just a brief simulacrum of how that goes in a moment. So, here we have our guy one. I take out the lid, and let's say that, for example, I have some tea inside. So, I will just pour it out, and once I wait my hypothetical time for a given tea and it's ready, I'll then just grab the guy one and then go into the Gongdao Bay. So the Gongdao Bay serves multiple purposes. It ensures that everyone gets tea from the same infusion with consistent strength because many people brew tea without using a Gongdao Bei. If you see how traditional Chaozhou tea is served, you will usually see tea masters serving straight from the teapot into the teacups, and they have learned through experience how to adapt and modify the pouring rate of the teapot and the pour itself in order to make sure that everyone gets the best possible cup of tea. And in some cases, some masters will have enough experience to know which parts of the brew are better suited for each guest. Perhaps you have a guest that wants more of that uh, more of that aroma at the beginning of the brew. Perhaps you have a guest that will want more of that robustness, bitterness that comes toward the end. But that is something that you learn with a lot of experience. And in most cases, if I brew tea and pour it into a single cup, there will be no problem. But if I am serving multiple people, I always run the risk of having one person having a brew much weaker than the other or the opposite. So that is why the usage of the tea pitcher allows everyone to get consistent strength. It also, of course, helps cool the tea down a little bit because, of course, once it comes out of the gaiwan, it's still very hot, so it helps to cool down the tea's temperature. In my case, as I usually drink by myself, that is the reason why I use a tea pitcher. I have sometimes just used my gaiwan or teapot and poured straight into my teacup because, there's no need to use this as I'm not serving multiple people. But I typically do use it just to let the tea cool down. So you may take that into account when you are buying your teaware. If you find it necessary, you may buy one. And, I do recommend having one in hand. It's always very handy tool. So next, teacups. Small cups, usually around 30 to 60 milliliters, will work perfectly for you. Now, there's a plethora of teacups out there ranging in many sizes. For example, one of the teacups that I typically use is this teacup, which has a capacity of about 120 milliliters. But the small size of teacups for Gongfu cha serves a purpose. It lets you appreciate how the tea changes across multiple infusions without getting full or overwhelmed by volume. So take that into account when you're buying your teacups as well. And if you want to, you can have a set of small teacups and one larger teacup for your daily drinking. Next, the tea tray. Ideally, you want a tea tray with some sort of drainage because this method involves a lot of rinsing and pouring, and water will go everywhere. That is normal. Gongfu brewing is kind of messy by nature. So these are often called chapan or teapots if they're the wooden variety. For example, the one I have here is one that I was gifted. It's not very good, and if I'm still using it, it's because I haven't found the need to replace it. But I personally wouldn't vouch for this specific model. Like it has a plastic vase and this section of made out of bamboo, but I don't like it a lot. It stains very easily and it just feels cheaply made. So if you go for a tea tray, if you want to have a tea tray, do try to find one that is made out of a decent material and also one that fits the size of your desk or the area in which you'll drink tea from. It's very important to keep that in mind. Now, optional but useful, I would say that having a tea strainer is something that is optional but may be useful if you find that having small tea bits at the bottom of your tea pitcher is very annoying. So in that case, you may use a tea strainer. This usually come in materials such as stainless steel as well as porcelain. I personally like to use porcelain ones, though I haven't used a tea strainer in a while because I thought, and perhaps it's just something that goes on in my mind, that the texture of the tea feels best when I just drink it from the guy one into the pitcher and then into my teacup. Though perhaps it's just my superstition. If you want to make sure, just buy a strainer, do a blind test, see if you detect some difference. If you do, then use the method you want, and if you don't, then use the strainer. At the end of the day, using the strainer will give you a very clean looking cup of tea. I would also recommend a tea pick for breaking up compressed tea. Having a tea pick is very useful. Now, of course, if you cannot use a tea pick, an ice pick or other things similar to that will work as well. But having a dedicated tool is always nice. And finally, something very important because, as I mentioned, you will make a mess when you brew Gongfu. That's just a given. A tea towel. Having a tea towel to dry up water and clean up anything that may be just annoying you is very useful to have. So, next, we'll go into the basics of understanding the tea to water ratio. Now, the key principle of what makes Gongfu brewing work is the tea to water ratio. This is what allows you to pull multiple infusions from the same leaves without the tea becoming weak or flavorless. In Western style brewing, you might use 2 to 3 grams of tea per 200 or 250 milliliters of water. I personally, if I brew Western, I use a ratio that's slightly higher than that, let's say 4 to 5 grams, so just a little bit more. So, roughly about 1 gram per 100 milliliters, or in my case, 1 gram per 70 milliliters for Western brewing. However, in Gongfu brewing, we flip the ratio dramatically because you will be using a ratio that's about 5 to 8 grams of tea per 100 to 120 milliliters of water, and sometimes even more. The most common ratio that you will see out there for Gongfu brewing is 1 gram to 15 milliliters. That's perhaps the golden standard when it comes to Gongfu brewing ratios. For some teas, you may want it to be a bit lower. Perhaps you want it to be a bit higher, and that is up to you. That depends on the strength of the tea or what you're looking out of a given tea. So let me break this down by tea type because the ratio may vary from tea type. So let's say that for example you have a Tie Guan Yin or a high mountain Taiwanese oolong. Now these expand significantly when steeped. So I would say that upon getting one of these teas, start with about 5 to 6 grams per 100 milliliters. The leaves, once open, will nearly fill your vessel after the first infusion. That will be for bold rolled oolongs. So for strip style oolongs like Feng Wan Dan Song and Wu Yi Yan Cha, these don't expand as much. Traditionally, these are the teas that were used to brew chow in the chow chow brewing style. So let's say that the ancestor of the Gongfu brewing style as we know it. And the amount of leaf that was typically used was very, very high. The standard was basically to just get your teapot and fill it with as much leaf as possible. But if I need to give you a ratio, you can probably use about 6 to 8 grams. And if you want to go like really hardcore into Chaozhou, then you can go up to 10 grams per 100 milliliter, right? So for raw pour and which is also known as sheng pour, you it's funny because sheng pour is so diverse that it it really depends. But if I have to give you like a range, I would say that somewhere around 5 to 7 grams per 100 milliliter works well. For compressed cakes, you might use a bit more because the compression makes it harder to extract. And also, you will need to wait more time when you rinse because the tea is much more heavily compressed. And for ripe pour, which is also known as zhou pour, it, it's a similar ratio to sheng pour, though some people like to make a very, very thick, very dark zhou pour, and they go to the 8-10 grams per milliliter range. So that just depends on you. I personally like to brew it a bit heavier because I just like it when it's very viscous. It just feels very nice in the mouth. For black tea, like Diang Hong from Yunnan or Kimen from Anhui, I would say that 5 grams works well. Maybe 6. I like 6, but I do know that some people like lighter ratios because black teas have a tendency of getting a bit acidic if made very strong. I have never had any experience like that with black tea in my case, and I like my black tea strong, so that is why I usually use a higher ratio. But for the standard drinker, yeah, 5 grams per 100 milliliter works, right? And for green and white tea, if you choose to brew it Gongfu style, I would say that 4 grams works. 4 grams per 100 milliliters, maybe 5. Some people go and use half of that. The only thing that they change is that they extend the brew time much more. The exact amount will depend, of course, on your personal taste and the specific tea. Some teas are inherently more robust and can handle higher ratios, and others are more delicate. But with experience, you will develop an intuition for how much leaf to use just by looking at it. When I started out brewing tea, I of course had issues when distinguishing the weight between rolled and stripped oolongs, and I still do to this very day. I still have the habit of measuring my tea, even though I have an understanding of how much tea I can grab in my hand and give an estimate of how much that is, I still use a scale just because I like reliability when brewing. So if you want that same reliability, you may get a scale. But I do think that learning how to measure out tea just by visualizing the amount is a good skill to have, because in the case that you don't have a scale, or perhaps you're drinking out at someone else's place and you bring tea or whatever and you don't have a scale, you still need to measure out tea somehow. And if they don't have a scale, what are you going to do? You need to learn how to measure tea by eye. So that is why you may want to perhaps grab uh, tea and just practice getting the feeling of the tea size. So next we'll go into water temperature. Water temperature varies by tea type and affects the flavor you extract out of the tea. To keep it simple, the hotter the water you use, the more you will extract out of your tea. There are many different water temperatures that you may like to use with tea. I personally subscribed to the idea that if a given tea is good, you can use boiling water with it, and you will get a very flavorful cup by using boiling water, right? That's just what I have gathered based on my experience. Even when brewing green teas, if they're good, they will be able to withstand boiling water without getting bitter, and I will actually get certain notes from it that are perhaps not as perceptible when you use more quote unquote appropriate temperatures. However, I will give you a basic rundown of standard good practice temperatures that you might like to use when brewing specific types of tea. So with green tea, most people like to brew it, or many people, let's say many people like to brew it in a range of about 70 to 80 degrees Celsius, or 160 to 175 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's too hot, if you use water that's too hot and your tea is not very good, you will extract excessive bitterness and astringency. So keep that in mind. You may also use that in order to test out if your green tea is very good or if it's just average. So you can use it to gauge out or have an idea of how good your green tea is. So for white tea, some people like to go very low and go for 80 degrees Celsius when it comes to very delicate teas like Bai Hao Yin Chen. But I would say that a range of about 85 to 90 degrees Celsius, or about 185 to 195 degrees Fahrenheit works. And in my case, I do brew white tea using boiling water, even silver needles, because I do believe that if the tea is good, it won't get bitter. And I have gotten good silver needle tea, and I have made it with boiling water, and no astringency and nothing has come out of it that is negative. White tea can withstand boiling temperature, but by using a lower temperature, and the same goes for every other tea that I'm talking about, you may be able to extract perhaps a bit less from the leaf, but you may get a bit more of the aroma of the leaf. You may get some aromatic compounds if you use lower temperatures, because of course the taste of the tea is not going over the aroma of the tea. So perhaps if you are aiming for a more aromatic cup, then lower temperatures might do it for you. Oolong will generally do very well with boiling water, even if it's green oolong such as high mountain tea from Taiwan or green tea guan yin. It Those will work with boiling water just fine, right? But if you perhaps, as I mentioned, want to get a more aromatic cup out of a Taiwanese oolong, you may want to lower the temperature and get something different out of it. But as I said, I would use boiling water with it. Nothing should happen if it's decent. No, nothing bad should happen if it's decent tea. So you can use boiling to near boiling water with oolong in my case. So for black tea, I think that anything from like almost near boiling to near boiling works in most cases. And black tea is a tea that does very well with water just off the boil, with the water that's slightly cooler. You will get perhaps a bit more of a floral aroma by doing this, or perhaps more floral undertones if you do this. But to get like that very, very strong, very complex brew, you will like to, you want to use hotter temperatures. Raw pour, boiling water. There's just no way around it. Just brew your pour with boiling water. The same goes for a show pour. Just use boiling water. When it comes to Gongfu brewing, there are no strict rules. You can dismiss pretty much everything I've said if you wish to do so. This is just a general idea of how different teas react to different temperatures. You will adjust tea based on the specific tea, its age, and what you're trying to extract. If you find a tea too bitter or astringent for whatever reason, then you can try lowering the temperature by 5 to 10 degrees. For example, let's say that you brew a green tea with boiling water and it comes out great. Then you can keep drinking that green tea with boiling water. But if you buy a different green tea and for some reason it just tastes awful with boiling water, then lower the temperature by 10 degrees. I'm talking Celsius right now. And if it still tastes bitter, then lower it by 5 or even 10 more until you find a point in which nothing off comes out of that tea. So I would go about tasting tea that way. Start with boiling water, and depending on how the tea reacts, then lower the temperature if needed. So the brewing process. The brewing process begins by warming your vessels. So pour hot water into your gaiwan or teapot, and then into your chahai, your tea pitcher, and then into your cups. So let's say that, for example, I am here, I have my kettle, and I have just boiled some water. I'm going to pour it. I'm going to let the water stay there for about 20 to 30 seconds. Right? And we do this in order to heat up the vessel because we don't want it to leach temperature off of our rinse. So once that is done, then we're going to pour the hot liquid into our tea pitcher, just like that, and then into your cups. You may want to move them around to make sure that the entirety of the cup is heated up. And once you're done with that, you may then discard the water if you need to. You may just discard it, put it elsewhere, and that'll be it. So next you want to add your tea. You'll open the gaiwan and you will put the tea in the gaiwan. I always like to take a moment to smell the dry leaf because you will notice that the aroma changes and intensifies after it's been warmed. So try to get a whiff of the tea when it's dry and try to imprint that scent into your memory. And then once you have rinsed your tea, remember that scent and compare it to the scent of the leaf as it's now rinsed. So the rinse, you will pour hot water over the leaves. Oh, let me open this. You will pour water over your leaves. You don't have to fill the gaiwan, just you have to make sure that all your leaves are covered up in hot water. And then you may wait wait a little bit to rinse, or you may do a flash rinse in which you just pour out and you pour in and then you pour out. Now, the rinse is something that for some people is optional depending on the tea. I personally do not rinse strip oolongs, green tea, white tea, and black tea. I do not rinse those teas. The green tea, because I think that because I use a very low tea to water ratio, I just do a very long first steeping, about 30 to 35 seconds. The same goes for white tea. Black tea does not really need to be rinsed because of the way that it's processed. As it is a tea that's heavily rolled, the compounds and chemicals of the tea are already in the surface of the leaf, so you don't really need to dig into it to get into the good stuff. And with strip oolong, it's already a tea that has a very large surface area, so once the hot water hits the leaf, it'll cover it up and it'll release everything relatively quickly. So I wouldn't rinse those teas. I would generally rinse, pour, be it Zhang or Shou, and rolled oolongs, because some rolled oolongs are very tightly compressed and they do need a bit of helping to get them started, because if you brew some Taiwanese oolongs without rinsing, you may notice that your first steeping is very weak, right? So I do recommend rinsing rolled oolongs, Zhang pour, Shou pour, always. Everything else, the rinse is optional. You can do it if you want it, and you can skip it if you want it. The rinse has, at least in my perspective, the purpose of helping the leaf open up, just to make sure that you nail that first steeping. Some people do the rinse because they perhaps want to clean the leaf a little bit, remove some dust, not to remove pesticides, right? That if rinsing will not get rid of pesticides. So if you think that by rinsing, like you're cleaning the tea from pesticides or anything like that, no, it doesn't work like that. It's just mainly to help the tea open up quickly and to get rid of dust if that bothers you a lot. So you have rinsed your tea, you have opened the Gaiwan, and you have taken a whiff of the wet leaf. Take a moment to just take in this scent and try to identify what comes to your mind when you smell this. Perhaps something fruity will come out, perhaps something a bit woody, perhaps something spicy, perhaps something sweet, perhaps something salty. Just take a moment to just take it in and enjoy it. This is something that is a part of the whole experience. You get to enjoy not only the taste of the tea, but the aroma of the wet leaf. So just take a pause, smell it, enjoy it. And once you're done with that, you come with your tea tray and you sit in your desk, you put everything is set up. You're ready for your first infusion. So, first infusion. Pour hot water over the rinsed leaves. For the first few infusions, steeping times are very short, often just 5 to 15 seconds, and sometimes even instantaneous for certain teas, such as black tea. You're not trying to extract everything at once after all. You want to coax out layers of flavor gradually. That is Gongfu brewing. As I mentioned, in the case of black tea, you want to pour hot water in and in most cases pour it out immediately. Some people like to perform longer steepings in black tea. I'm one of those, but sometimes I do brew black tea in this fashion and it works well. And with some teas, perhaps you want a longer infusion. For Taiwanese oolongs, for example, I do longer infusions, about 25 seconds when I start out. And these come out very well. So You may take into account this 5 to 15 second range for your very first few infusions. Perhaps you may want to leave the tea a little bit longer. You may also do so as well. For your subsequent infusions, which are typically infusions 2 through 5, you can keep the steeping times about the same. If you want to increase or decrease by 5 seconds, you may do so as well, but generally for these first 5 infusions, the steeping times will be very, very similar. Once you get into the 6th infusion, you will start to notice that perhaps tea starts to fall off. And once it starts to fall off, then you may want to add 5 to 10 seconds and then continue with as many steepings as your tea can take. Black teas generally last about 6 to 8. Oolongs about the same. White tea is a very hearty tea, I will say. I have gotten sessions with white tea in which it has gone to the 10 infusion mark and it still tastes very good. Raw pour, Shang pour is of course as well very, very hearty for these infusions. The same goes for short pour. Green tea you'll probably get about five to six more or less. I've gotten about 5 to 6. Some people say that only 4, but in my experience, I would say that about 5 to 6. But now, I want to reiterate once again, you will be the one brewing tea and you will discover how many steepings your tea can take. It is your journey, and this is only my perspective on this. Your journey will definitely be different than mine, so try to enjoy it as much as possible and just have fun when doing this. The essence of Gongfu tea brewing is that it's not complicated as it might seem at first. It's really just about using more leaf, less water, and shorter steeping times, and then repeating the process until the leaves are spent. The method rewards patience and attention. Each infusion will taste different, and you will notice how the tea evolves as you work through the session. And that is the point. Drinking tea using Gongfu style is not about just drinking tea. If you just want to drink tea, you can drink it in a large teapot and just slurp it out, put some sugar milk on it if you want, and just go about your day. Gongfu brewing is about experiencing a specific tea, trying to find out what you like and dislike about it, trying to taste out and evaluate how it feels, how it makes you feel, how it reacts to your mouth, and just having that enjoyable moment of sitting down on your desk as you work, or perhaps just as a momentary moment of focus in which you want to dedicate yourself solely to making tea. You will sit down, you'll put your favorite tea in your gaiwan or your teapot, and you will experience it. So, if you have any questions, perhaps something that you might want to know that perhaps I didn't talk about, feel free to ask in the comments. I will be glad to answer your questions because, after all, that is what I want to do. I want to make sure that you have learned something from this video and that now you will perhaps have a bit of inspiration to get into Gongfu tea. So with all that said, I hope this was helpful, and thank you very much for listening to this video. Once again, there are many videos out there about how to brew tea Gongfu style. So I hope that this new perspective will be useful to you somehow. Perhaps it's not the most otherworldly stuff, the thing, but it's something that's special for me, and I I just wanted to communicate that. And yes, once again, thank you very much for listening to me speaking about tea. I hope you're having a great day, afternoon, or evening, as always. And I hope to see you soon once again. Bye bye.